The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena. The television screen is the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television screen is part of the physical structure of the brain.
Okay, here we go. This is the third episode of The Outer Reels. Tonight we're watching The Brood. We're talking about The Brood from 1979, David Cronenberg film. Jason is here as always.
Hello.
The first thing I got to say about this movie is that we're doing these quote unquote, lesser known 1970s Canadian sci-fis, and I think the first thing that people will say was, well, The Brood's not that obscure and it's also not really sci-fi, but I put this movie in a realm, for me, I think it's what I consider high concept sci-fi. The best movie that does this is Phantasm, also from the same year, and which funnily enough also has midgets in it, midget creatures. So Phantasm is the better of the two, but this still I think is worthy of a mention. It's not a straight horror, a little more sci-fi horror, or like I said, high concept.
Yeah. I'll admit I was worried because Cronenberg, body horror, Cronenberg's hit and miss with me. So, and I was a little concerned about how gross I was going to find this, but it wasn't bad, and it's a slow burn.
It's definitely a slow burn.
Yeah, so I was able to go a ways into it before I started cringing a bit.
It's like these early days of Cronenberg, mutated flesh porn, like everything else to come after this.
Well, this is very early. This is like his first sort of real.
Yeah, he'd done a few things beforehand. It's actually interesting because this also, so 1979, this came out also in the same month. Yeah, so 1979, Fast Company came out on March 18th, which is a race car movie. Mm-hmm. And then Brood came out on May 25th. So it's a strange release for a director, like back to back within a month.
I guess Rabid might be, or Shivers too. Yeah, okay, there's a few going back that would be very much Cronenberg. And of course his original Crimes of the Future, which what little I've seen of it, just, I never need to see that movie.
Yeah, so. He definitely has a style and a look and a feel. Because following up after this, he takes a break. Well, I wouldn't say takes a break, but 79, nothing comes out in 80, but 81, Scanners comes out.
Scanners.
Which Michael Ironside, who we all love, also a Canadian, he says that Brood is his favorite Cronenberg.
There you go.
Kick it off then. What's your synopsis for this movie?
Oh, man, how would I describe this? Essentially a single dad because his wife has been committed to a rather questionable therapy center, I guess is how you could put it. He notices that his daughter comes back from visiting her mom one day with like bruising on her back, like that she's been hit or whipped and this takes him down this path of and starts to encounter the Brood. I don't know how else to sum it up. I mean, it's more psychological than anything else. From this movie, I've learned that women are evil. All grandparents are drunks.
Yeah, she was great.
Grandmothers, if they're divorced, they're whores. So. That's what I've managed to pick out from this.
When he's on the phone. Yeah. They mentioned the term psychoplasmics, which I think is an interesting, in John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, Carpenter always talks about that this movie is basically a commentary on quantum physics. This movie, they call it psychoplasmics, which is kind of a spin-off based off like a therapy called Gestalt therapy.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a spin on that, which is like a role-playing character-to-character sort of way to extract information from somebody, like using an open discussion.
Okay.
Kind of controversial, not because anything horrible happens, but I think people just say, it doesn't kind of work. I'm sure there's plenty of people who do it who would argue that with me, but it seems to be the consensus when I was looking into it. That's sort of where it landed. A sort of here now therapy, which is, tell us about how you're feeling now about a past event and how you would deal with it knowing what you know now.
Interesting.
With Carpenter's movie with Prince of Darkness, the movie isn't just, oh, hey, this is quantum physics and this is how it works. That's the backer to why the vault of evil is there and it exists in this parallel world where it's trying to come into. I don't know. if that was kind of where he was going with this, but there's just a little bit more with this psychoplasmics thing, essentially being based off a real type of therapy, but he just puts a cool Cronenberg spin on the term.
Right. So he's basically saying that there's a physical attribute to this therapy. You see it from the start with that first guy, which I thought was one of the most weirdest takes on Waiting for Godot or something at the beginning, right? Like they're in a theater setting.
Yeah.
And it's just two guys talking, and I thought, is this just like some weird avant-garde play that the dialogue just isn't supposed to make a lot of sense? And
that's how the first time I saw it, that's how it sort of played for me as well. I was like, oh, is this some kind of like hardcore like play because there's people applauding and stuff, and I didn't realize it was a therapy thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he's got all those sores on his back or whatever, and or
Yeah.
was it his chest, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. And I wasn't sure if it was like meant to be portrayed as like stage makeup or something in the movie, but they're also in like
Yeah,
karate
exactly.
gis, which I was like,
Exactly.
which is a strange. So speaking of that scene, the doctor, played by Oliver Reed, his Dr. Raglan. I really know him from one other thing, but I thought he had a lot of presence. He was good. He's done a lot of work, but just nothing that I've
Yep.
seen. But you should also know him. Most importantly, he's the head of the KGB in Condor Man from 1981.
I love the references you managed to pull up.
Dude, Condor Man's a great movie.
Let's ignore the fact that he's in The Pit and the Pendulum and The Return of the Musketeers and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
All of those sit nowhere near Condor Man on my shelf of movies.
He had quite the career in the earlier 70s and 60s. I mean, he's in Tommy, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
But yeah. Condor Man. I had one of those scholastic books of Condor Man.
Oh my God, really? That's so cool.
Came with photo. It was a paperback. Came with photos from the movie inside of it.
That's incredible. You got to dig that up if you still have that.
Oh, I don't have that anymore. Jesus.
Well, man,
It's long gone.
Guess what I'm going on eBay tonight to try and buy? Now I know that one exists. Back to Oliver Reed's performance in this Dr. Raglan. Really good. I think he was the best character in the movie as far as acting was. The most
I
interesting.
mean, there's some classic Canadians in this too. You know, from Harry Beckman, to Art Hindle, who am I trying to? Nicholas Campbell, for God's sakes, is in this. Who would, of course, later on have a much bigger part in the Dead Zone.
Yeah, there's a couple Dead Zone people in here. Art Hindle, who plays the main character, the husband, Frank.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the dynamic against his wife, who's Samantha Egger. I can't tell if, like, I don't want to do him disservice by saying, oh, it was a weak character. It was weak acting.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly got the chops. He can certainly do it, even if this is earlier in his career. I thought he was fine. I think it was just, I don't think the script is as fleshed out as something we would recognize from Cronenberg nowadays.
Yeah, he was in Body Snatchers, a year before that Invasion of the Body. Great San Francisco film, being in San Francisco, and I love that movie. He was in The Octagon. That is also over on my side of the shelf with Condor Man from, it was like 1980, but that was an all-star cast. It had Lee Van Cleef, of course, Chuck Norris. Did you ever see the TV show that Lee Van Cleef was in, The Master, from like 1984?
No, but I know of it.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like Lee Van Cleef and Timothy Patton drive around in a van and do ninja stuff and help people. Tim Patton was interesting because he was the kid in that, and he went on to direct a bunch of big TV, like he did episodes of The Wire, Sopranos, Deadwood, Game of Thrones, even did a Black Mirror episode. So,
Oh, wow.
also, speaking of Art Hindle, also did you know that Art Hindle played Sasquatch Sid Sucker in Monster Brawl?
No, I did not.
Oh, dude, you saw Monster Brawl, right?
No, I have not.
Dude, Monster Brawl was great. It's like 2011. It's got Lance Henriksen, and it's set up like an underground society that get together every year and do this WWF style Monster Brawl. And like everybody's there, like Bigfoot, Frankenstein, the Swamp Thing, and they just get together and have these fights. And there's these guys that sit just like WWF commentators and commentate on the monsters fighting in a ring. And it's like all these elite come to watch it. It's a super cool, quirky movie.
I will have to seek it out.
At least watch the trailer. The trailer is a really good trailer. Speaking of trailers,
Never heard of this.
did you know that the theatrical release trailer for this movie, Joe Dante cut it?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I love just time periods like these when it was just all the great guys and they all just knew each other and everybody was just helping out in one way or another. You always find out about everybody helped on everybody, you know?
Oh, yeah, it happened a lot back then.
Like the classic photo of James Cameron doing a matte painting for John Carpenter on Escape from New York.
It still happens nowadays. It's just you don't hear about it as much, I think. One other notable actor in here is Susan Hogan as the teacher. I didn't even recognize her at first. I've met her a few times. I've done 3 movies with
Really?
her. Yeah.
This is
She lives here in town.
That's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was done in Toronto, but I looked her up after a certain point because I was like, I don't recognize her, and I had a picture of her more her age now on IMDb of when she was in Battlestar Galactica. I'm like, oh, and I scroll down through, and it's like, yeah, I know, I did at least a couple movies. It turns out it's 3. So I would have met her at least in a couple ADR sessions. So
We could basically turn this series into 6 degrees of separation of Jason. Of every
as long as we keep doing Canadian stuff, sure. Well, yeah, because Nicholas Campbell did Da Vinci's Inquest, and I used to, oh God, what was I doing? I think I was doing the caption and coding on that or something like that way back in the day. But speaking of job designations, I would have been doing like dailies, VHS copies of Da Vinci's Inquest.
Oh.
So
God,
way back in the day.
Man, our dailies on tape were just happening, like just kind of on their way out when I was at Warner's in Sydney. And it was, everybody was just so happy that we didn't have to lay stuff and take the tape over to the theater and could actually just play it off the drives, because it was such a, I mean, I always think about the film days of film dailies of, like, you know, the turnaround time and the overnight processing, and Can comes back and stringing it up. Different times, man.
I did an indie movie 3 years ago. They shot it on film.
Oh, nice.
And I tried my hardest to talk him out of it because it was just a cost that I said, we can put a filter over it and you'll never tell the difference that this doesn't look like Super 16. Trust me. And he's like, nope, I'm doing it authentic. I want it to look real. I'm like, okay, I can tell you didn't grow up with this stuff. You know, he's younger than me, so did not want to hear it.
Of course.
But it's like, you know, shooting in Vancouver, and some of it was shot in Korea, and they had to process everything in Montreal.
Oh, wow.
And ship it because there's no film labs
Yeah,
left
of course.
over here. I mean, it was there, or it was I think Montreal's the only place where there's still a film lab in Canada. That, New York, LA, those are your 3 choices. There's nothing down in Seattle anymore. There's nothing. I mean, there used to be.
The scanning lab in San Francisco doesn't exist anymore. As soon as we stopped doing film, clearly had no work, and it just dried up.
Oh, exactly. I mean, but like on Da Vinci, I would have been doing overnight dailies, so we would have transferred from 35 onto digital Betacam.
Yes.
And then run VHS dubs. James Cameron's series he did with what's her name, Dark Angel, it was called. You know, you try and get these things. They want them in LA for mid-morning, so you know they would shoot during the day. You do your starter transfers at like 9 o'clock at night, and we would try and get as much done as we could before about 2 a.m. because then the tape room has to make everything. And
Right.
and then a courier shows up at 4 a.m. to run it to the airport. And it's on what they used to call the fish flight, because I guess it was what they used to throw, Air Canada flight, they used to throw all the fish on to take it down to the States. The fresh stuff every day, but we would throw it on this flight. It's the first flight out, and with a courier and everything, I think it could be at the Fox exec's office for about 10:30, 11 a.m.
Incredible.
So they could watch their dubs on their lunch or their dailies on the lunch.
Yeah.
And now you just transfer it overnight, and you know, you upload it. So
I know. It's just so different. And you know, the lane to tape thing was always, because you had to back time it out. It's like, if you've got a long TRT, you know, high speed dubbing wasn't flying for that stuff. So it was just, you had to roll it out 1-to-1.
There'd be lots of times where we just have too much footage and they're only getting half.
Yeah.
So
like,
they
that's
get
what
the
it
first hour and that's it. There you go. We
Another
have
digression.
massively digressed.
So let's talk about the woman who plays the wife, which I thought she did a great job in this, like a dynamic role. Pretty classic 70s, you know.
Crazy person.
Yeah. Just,
Yeah.
yeah, crazy 70s wife.
Crazy
Samantha
boomer.
Egger, she was also, what I know her from was The Exterminator. She was the lead role in that, which is 1980. She was the doctor in that, which is a great movie. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any Canadian people, or it's not really science fiction, so we can't talk about it on this show. And the other interesting thing about Samantha Eggers is that Cronenberg was going through a really harrowing divorce at the time when he wrote this script. And some of her tendencies, he admitted that he rolled in from his ex-wife and made her do and say these things and be just what it is. So there's a little bit of venom in there as well.
Yep, I caught that too. And when we get to it, when she shows herself for the first time with the brood, there's a little antidote in there I read too, but I'll wait till we get to it.
Really, we're at this point in this movie where there's this facility. It's called Soma Free.
You took way better notes than me. I admit I had a hard time trying to remind myself I should make some notes in this movie because it's Cronenberg. I just got sucked right into it right away.
Well, we could also talk about that. This is clearly a very good looking movie, but when you look at the budget of this is 1.4 million. And so not a huge amount more. So 40% more of Starship Invasions.
But a director who knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And also not too much of a spectacle, too. There's no UFOs. There's no underground pyramids. There's not all this like fun stuff. It's very matter of fact. There's no real set pieces or anything. So the money definitely went into...
and there's some creature effects. And that's really the extent of it.
The facility Soma Free, kind of this rehabilitation that specializes in this whole psychoplasmics type deal. His wife is there. You don't really find out how she ended up like there to begin with. The movie just kind of starts and she's there and he can't see her.
Exactly. But she's supposed to see her daughter every week.
This whole thing where the doctor is playing off with Frank's wife and sort of, he's like almost trying to be this like creepy husband and he's telling her about she's being a mother and she's got to do, she's got to act motherly, and he's like almost brainwashed her to this point where she's sort of in this sort of happy psychosis trance where she's just living at this facility and doesn't really even have a correlation or doesn't have an understanding of time or anything, or when her daughter's coming or when her husband's coming to visit. And every time the husband comes to visit, the doctor is like, you know what, it's better for her if you don't see her. It's better for her if she doesn't know you're here, trying to sort of keep the communication away because he's obviously got other plans with what he's doing with her.
Yeah, so you just assume there's something nefarious going on, that doctor's trying to keep her husband away from her because he's trying to get something going with her, is sort of alluded, never shown, but you just kind of assume maybe that's what's going on because that's what the husband starts to think, right?
Yeah, and you really don't know what's going on until the first sort of sighting of the brood, which is actually pretty terrifying, the way it's shot.
Yeah, so... I want to back up a little bit. So he leaves his daughter with his mother-in-law. Oh, yeah, because he has to go to work, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing Grandma does is like grab a drink and then gets another one. And
she's going ham on that whiskey. Like every shot she's taking a sip. I wasn't sure if she was overacting or this is part of the character to be just like pounding it.
Yeah, she went and she refreshed her drink at least 3 times that I counted.
And then she even
she
even has a line to the kids. She says, "You stay here. I'm gonna go top up my drink and then we can play or whatever." It was it seemed like a big character thing to have her as this overblown alcoholic.
It seemed to be, because then she got them both a refresher. But again, this stems back. This girl is Gen X. This is why Gen X is the way we are. She grew up with her mom being crazy, her dad dumping her on her drunk whore grandma, and who apparently got around a lot.
They make it known. The conversations, they want to really make sure that you know that. It's an interesting line to put in there.
It's a strange ad to note. I guess they wanted to make sure you knew that the grandparents had divorced. Many lovers, apparently.
That brings us to our first engagement with...
So it's coming out of the cupboard, basically, right?
Yeah, so it's a pretty cool scene because there's a lot of tension. This movie is a slow burn, and so there's this sort of slow burn in the kitchen. It's the classic like tropes of like, oh, there's a noise. What is it? And it's, sound and then discovery. When you get a glimpse of this thing coming out this cabinet, and it's clearly a young kid in like a snowsuit onesie.
Yeah.
The way it's shot, everything's blocked. The few times you get a look at the face, because you don't get to see it properly. You just know it doesn't look right, but you don't know why it doesn't look right because you don't get to sit on it for long enough. And then there's a shot where it's up on the banister rails and it has its hands, and its hands are covered in blood. And as soon as the camera's on it, it jumps out of the way and it leaves these bloody footprints. It's shot really well. It's fun. It's cool.
Yeah, it does it well. There was one part I noticed that when they were stuff falling out of the cupboards and the camera's panning up, there is stuff falling from above the top shelf.
There's like a stagehand up there just dropping stuff.
Exactly.
I
And it's like
that.
you waited just a smidge too long before you cut.
That's actually pretty good. There is a great moment. So after that first encounter, then when the police call the husband to say, hey, like something's going on at the house, picks up the phone, and then it's the cop, and he starts a conversation, and he's like, something's happened at your house. And then there's a hard cut. Art is in the actual police station with the cop who called him, or the detective who called him, and they're continuing the conversation. I can't think of another movie where I've seen that kind of...
No, it was clever.
It's not a dissolve or anything like that. If you blink, you miss it, but it's still, it's nice and it's subtle. I like when people do stuff, it's creative, but they're not saying, hey, look at what I'm doing here to make this cool. It's just, it blows by really quick. I thought it was a nice transition.
Again, this movie's shot well. It's going to be the outlier, I think, in a lot of things that we look at.
For sure.
So
it is the nicest looking movie, but there's a lot of locked off stuff it's not too fancy. It's typical late 70s filmmaking for the most part.
So he's at the police station. He's talking to the cop. The psychologist comes in. And for a second, I thought it was Greg Brady.
Like just Brady Bunch of Greg Brady?
Yes, he looked like Greg Brady to me for a split second there. He expresses concern. The daughter won't talk. We don't know what she saw, but she's pretty horrified. And then he take Frank to go get his daughter, and his daughter is in the break room watching TV. There's like 3 ashtrays full of cigarettes on the coffee table, and she's sitting there like sucking on a chocolate bar to the point of where it's all over her face. If you can go back, pause it. There's just there's 2 or 3 ashtrays on that table. They're filled with cigarettes. I mean, it was a different age, but still.
I think the next part is when they go to Care Ward, or that apartment. What is that place? The character is Jan Hartog. What is it a rehabilitation center? What is that place where he goes?
I took it as that. Like he's in almost like what we'd call a hospice care nowadays. Because he's dealing with a crazy cancer, I guess is how they describe it, or a lymphoma or something. But basically he's got this plasmatics or whatever they're called hanging off of his throat. So he wears himself covered up all the time.
And what's interesting is when he reveals his throat, he sort of says it like as if like this is what the doctor did. Like it's sort of alluded to like, oh, is he like a maniacal surgeon? Is he implanting things on people, or is he like cutting people up and adding things? And I don't think that's ever really resolved on how. I think my understanding is that with psychoplasmics, he can convince people to grow these things, is how I really ended up taking it.
Yeah, I think at this point, though, you're supposed to assume that the doctor is again doing things, and maybe it's a bit of the Island of Dr. Moreau kind of thing going on. Like assume that he created the creature. It's a fake out, right? But it's just...
Can I just say I'm so happy that you brought up the Island of Dr. Moreau, because when you finally do get a closer look, a more static look at the Brood, I think these are the least Cronenberg components of this movie, is the faces on the Brood. They're very different to all the other Cronenberg effects and practical makeup. But I thought, I was just like, what are these guys? These guys look like some Dr. Moreau kind of. There's a different look to them, separate than everything else that you see in the movie. And for some reason, I don't know.
I think that's sort of what they were kind of going for. And excuse me, you're supposed to assume that the doctor is doing weird surgeries and stuff now, and he's causing these sores that you saw on the guy at the start. He's done something to make that Jan Hardog guy have that weird shit on his neck, that sort of thing, right? Like it's just,
And it's super gross too when you see it. It's classic Cronenberg grossness.
yeah, exactly.
Did you notice who that guy is? Robert Silverman, the actor?
Yeah.
I know him most importantly from Waterworld. He's actually has a bit part. He's at the bar. They're sitting at the bar and he's like, man, I just want one sip of hydro. He's like a hydro addict on the atoll. It's a very, very small part. He was also in Jason X as Dieter Perez.
Yeah, I mean, he's in Existenz.
Yes.
He's in Scanners. He's obviously a friend of Lynch, and he pops up in Naked Lunch. It's all sorts of stuff. But I totally recognized him, and I'm trying to figure out where I saw him from, and I'm guessing I remember him from Naked Lunch.
But Jim Isaac, the director of Jason X, also a little tidbit for you. He directed House 3, which is getting into your wheelhouse, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Not House 2, of course. He wanted to use Cronenberg's effects guys for Jason X. And so, because he's a big Cronenberg fan, and Cronenberg heard about that they were reaching out to his guys, called him and said, hey, Jason X or Jason 10 is happening and they want us to do the work. And Cronenberg got word of it and he's like, yeah, do it, but get me in the show. He's like specifically wanted to be in the 10th Jason movie, which is just a cool thing to think of Cronenberg, which is why he has that he randomly shows up and then just gets impaled.
But yeah, no, I like him when Cronenberg acts. I mean, he's had a very cool role on Star Trek Discovery in there.
Haven't seen an episode.
No, I know. It's over now. I haven't watched the last episode yet, but they've wrapped that one up.
I didn't know.
But he plays like this future, basically like a future head of the CIA. It's like the CIA kind of spook. He suits it really well.
There's another Brood scene which is pretty great in the bathroom there.
Oh yeah, it's when they find him, right?
Right.
And they realize it's still in the house. It's when they catch the Brood creature because its battery ran out. So.
A great line. I really like that. This is the moment. So this would be probably like the middle of Act 2. Like it is a slow burn, but this is the moment for me when the slow pacing starts to work because you get a little taste of what's happening. And there's this shot after the Brood ends up it's not like they kill it or they defeat it. It just stops in its tracks and starts like twitching on the floor. And it's actually kind of creepy the way it's just sort of having this weird, like sort of neurological meltdown, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. It's again, it just, Cronenberg doesn't think the same way we do, or anybody else. I think he's got his own sort of thing. I don't know who would have.
Then the call comes in it's the detective, and they're like, it's not a very good progress because you don't even know that the police kind of went and got this body or really did anything with it, right? Like this weird creature body, like expose of that happening, right? Or did I miss that?
No, I don't think so. I think they just, it's next thing you know, we're at the morgue.
The Toronto police station again, which that shot from Starship Invasions where they go steal the boards was actually the front of the Toronto PD, actually, because it's such a familiar looking building already. Detective tells Frank, he's like, hey, we have it and we need you to come down to the morgue to talk about it, which is actually gets into one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
And they start talking about it, how it doesn't have a belly button, how and then there's like this energy sac, like a camel, I think is how he describes it, between the shoulder blades or something.
Calls it a solid nutrient sac. And he said, you might know it as a gas tank. He kind of, when he mentions that, and he just basically is like, yeah, it just expired. It ran out of its stuff. Now you start to realize that these Brood children only have a finite amount of time and this nutrient thing. So it doesn't really explain why they're just killing people. Like they're not killing them for nutrients, or they're just killing them because it's a Cronenberg movie. Then you think about when he explains that it just kind of ran out, that makes sense of it having that kind of meltdown on the bathroom floor because nobody actually killed it or did anything. It just has this sort of twitch and it just kind of shuts down. But I really liked the autopsy scene. It's lit with this surprisingly strange, it's like a purple filter. And I don't know if it's intentional for just to have a vibrant change in color. I think what it is because the puppet isn't great looking. It's like the Brood is like laid out on the morgue table, and it just doesn't look that good as a puppet. So maybe they just blew everything out with color to not make you wonder about it.
Well, and the purple makes you kind of think maybe they're using some kind of black light to.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Maybe that's entirely like a thing.
one thing when it comes to movies, I can justify anything in anything. It's how I fight QC reports. So I
Good
do it
stuff.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can explain this away. Give me a minute.
there's a note that the morgue guy says too. He's like, it has strange beak-like gums. You don't really see those, or it's never actually portrayed. But him saying
No.
that just makes you think, what is this? Like it's a weird animal, or it's a weird grown thing. Like it doesn't have human teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Like they make a point of saying that it doesn't have teeth, but their beak-like gums would apparently really hurt if they bit you.
Beak-like gums is just a weird. It's two words that I just don't think would ever really go together.
No, exactly. It's again Cronenberg.
Yeah,
The guy's weird.
he's well on the path to combining flesh in all types of different situations possible. Remember the soup from Existenz, where he gets the gun, Ray Liotta with the gun out of the soup and the teeth? Such a great scene.
Yeah, I have not watched Existence.
Okay.
I just remember thinking this is going to be too gross for me.
It almost, because it hits that 90s vibe, it loses some of that rich, dark 70s and 80s horror grossness, and it almost gets, I don't want to use the word camp, but it gets to this sort of lighter tone in a weird way. But worth looking at, because it's a visually incredible movie, as expected.
Yeah, I may break down and watch it at some point. I know it was one of a handful of question our reality movies that came out at the end of the year, along with like The Matrix and there's the 10th Floor, I think it was called. There's a handful of movies around then.
13th Floor, Dark
13th Floor. There
Dark
you go.
City. You could also
Dark City. Yep.
you could also do Strange Days. Great one.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like that run. That's a fun run. We could do a series on that. All right, so we should say so by this point, we're kind of knocking on the door of the third act. Essentially, now he knows that these are unnatural things and they're not of human descent, and we just don't know yet what their purpose is or why they exist. But
Well, we don't know there's more than one yet either.
Yes.
So, like, it's just the one, right? Because the grandpa hasn't been killed yet. And I guess that when the grandpa gets killed is when you realize, oh, there's more than one.
which the grandpa death is like, it's okay, but I think the following death, where the movie gets creepy, is when you go to his daughter's school, or Cindy's school. I thought that was it was shot well. It's very eerie, and it's like you're in this, what is it, like third grade or something like that, or however young these kids
Yeah,
are.
and it's just all these kids in snowsuits. So when the three broods show up, you don't think anything of it because they just look like you only see them from the back. So
More kids in
nobody else-
snowsuits.
Yeah, more kids in snowsuits. So the rest of the class is all getting unchanged, and they one of them takes the girl away, right? Like, and then the other two stay.
Yeah,
And-
it's a very creepy shot because they're all unpacking their bags and they're all still in their snowsuits on the side of the classroom, and then the brood surround Cindy, and she kind of like looks at them and isn't so sure about. You can tell she knows they're not normal or something, but it's this innocence that comes across of being a kid, of just not really knowing or understanding, and then they lead her to a side door, and then the two of them sort of open this door, and she walks out with one of them, and it's terrifying. It really got me. I was like, oh God, this is.
Yep, they just lead her out, and then the other two come back and attack the teacher because she pissed the mom off at one point. The mom called. Yeah, so we should go back a little bit. When Grandpa's getting killed, before he gets killed, he's drunk, and because these grandparents only drink, he's drunk. He calls Frank and gets him to, basically he's like all upset and depressed and everything else. And he's at the grandma's house checking out the place, and he's basically fondling her chalk mark on the floor, or taped out body outline.
Chalkmarkfondlers.com.
Yeah. So I find it funny because Grandpa earlier in the day confronts the doctor, and before he does that, we're watching him, takes several nips off of a flask as he gets out of his car. So, and even says, like, he's drunk. Just leave him. He's drunk. When the guy gets back in his car and drives away. It was a different time.
He does the classic. Yeah, Grandpa does the classic. I know what you're up to. I know what's going on in there.
Yeah.
Get my daughter out of there. But it fizzes out. And Oliver Reed's just smooths it over. And his character still, there's a presence that he has where even though he doesn't do much or there's not a dynamic range, you still feel like he's in control at all times.
Well, and it's menacing, right? Because then the creature attacks the grandfather, and it's, you think it's because Oliver Reed has sicked it on him because mouthed him off at the institute. So then, you know, Frank gets there, and he basically, the teacher comes over for dinner, and because she's obviously got a thing for Frank,
right?
And he convinces her to babysit because, you know, he's got to go get Grandpa because Grandpa's drunk and he's afraid he's gonna drive.
And then he bails on her on their date, and he's just like, "I'm going. Read this book.
Here's a book. I'll only be 45 minutes." So, and of course he's hours because Grandpa gets killed and he's got to go to the police station and shit again. And when he, you know, finally does get back, in the meantime, Mom's called the house, and, you know, this hot teacher answers, and she freaks out on the woman and on the teacher. So that, of course, is why she's a target at school, you know, 2 days later.
Which leads to probably the most unbelievable death of bludgeoning in the movie. Like, that's kind of how these things kill people, is they just bludgeon, but they're these little midgets, and they're not that, they're scary to look at, and when they're scurrying around, but they're not that much of a threat. And then they
grab these two little block hammers.
Would kids wooden toy like hammers that just don't have any volume or any weight behind them, and then they jump
you might
her.
get a bruise.
Yeah, they jump her, and she just starts acting like her head's being split open, which actually, when you see the shot of her dying, bleeding out, and all the kids are standing around, it's gory. Yeah. Like, it's so much gorier than those little
Well,
wooden...
it's amazing how, sorry to cut you off there, but it's amazing how violent it is as they're shooting this with those kids in the room. Again, different time.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to get away with that nowadays. And you just got these two creatures sort of hanging off this woman, and she's screaming and freaking out, and you got kids in the background. This is not a modern day composite VFX shot or anything.
No.
No, these kids are like, horrified by this, or actually they're not even. Some of them just kind of looking over, like, what's going on here.
Yeah, it's gory.
And then then the close-ups of the kids are some of the most overacting I've ever seen in my life. It's hilarious, and I loved every second of it.
See that? I felt like that was a complete, like, maybe even second unit, or just shot at a different time or whatever, and they're like, now act shot. Like,
obviously, yeah, totally. And then they do all these reaction shots and stuff. But yeah, and then the teacher is just like, man, it's just like the blood, and they don't show you much. But,
but when he comes in, when Frank runs into the room and she's bleeding out, it's the first real taste of full-on Cronenberg gore in this movie, I think, because her skull is supposedly like split up, and the blood is just so thick and dark red. It has that real viscous look.
And this is where he realizes his daughter's gone.
Right. So that would be really the third act, essentially. Now he's on his way. And then now I may have gotten this out of order. When did they clear out? Because this wasn't clear to me. We go to this shot, and they're at Soma Free, and they're putting all of the patients on the bus. And the character Michael from that opening scene is there, and he's not wanting to get on the bus. But I still don't. I couldn't catch what triggers some FM being cleared out.
I think it was the grandfather's death.
Oh.
That was what, because then it's like he gets off the phone and he finds out the grandfather's dead. Because the grandmother, could have been anything. The grandfather's now dead. So he knows something's going on now, and he's trying to get them all out to get them out of harm's way, right?
Right.
But we don't know that yet. You think he's clearing the cult out because he's getting ready for a standoff or something.
Right. Yeah, that's what it is. Like, it's under his orders that everybody's leaving.
Yep.
And there's
And that one guy who we see at the beginning with him doesn't want to leave because he's basically a man-child and can't live without him.
yeah, Michael, and that's an interesting cut because they're trying to load Michael on the bus, and he's the one who doesn't want to go, and all the other patients are getting on. And from that scene, we end up back at the rehabilitation place with Jan Hardog, but I don't really understand why. Like, did the bus take everybody there? I couldn't really read that and understand what was actually
No,
happening.
I don't. I read it as as Michael knew Jan already and didn't want to go, but he knew he couldn't stay, so he went to Jan because he's got this codependency thing with anybody. So that's how I took it, and maybe all the rest of the people aren't there.
Right.
But yeah, it could very well be that everyone was taken to where this place where Jan is.
So the stakes are high now. Dr. Raglan's cleared the facility out because he knows that the heat is on. Then Frank is on his way to the facility, and there's a couple shots where he drives to the facility, and I feel like they were shot day for night, like tungsten. Did you notice that? There's a
Yeah,
real
oh, yeah.
blue
Yep.
sort of look, and then
They're-
when he finally gets to the establishment, it's actually dark, but there's these two shots of him driving and on foot, and I'm like, man, this looks like those old tungsten 240 day for night westerns, and
Yeah.
it just caught me because I don't see that much anymore.
No, oh yeah, for good reason. I hate day for night. It ruins Lawrence of Arabia for me. There's some shots there that's like that.
It's
like,
fine.
I'm sorry, these shadows wouldn't be
I
there.
was gonna say it's fine at high noon, but you only get a couple of minutes of that, and then things start getting
Exactly.
long. Yeah, it is a strange one for sure. I feel like maybe it was an afterthought or a problem. Second unit might have shot that car exterior, and they shot it in the day,
Probably,
and they're like,
yeah.
"Oh boy, we got
Yeah.
this needs to be night." Who knows?
No, I'm sure that's exactly what it was.
So Frank's on the case, and he arrives at the facility, and he has an interaction with Raglan. He shows up, and Raglan's exiting, and Dr.
Yeah.
Raglan still plays his calm, cool, collected, and they have an exchange here, which I wasn't expecting the way to go. I thought Raglan was going to protect everything and, essentially
Yeah,
try and kill
yeah.
Frank at all costs.
But there's the interaction between them is quite funny because he kind of sneaks up behind him.
Yeah.
And then, but really only talks to him. But he's kind of, or does he push him against the wall or something?
Yeah,
Maybe
he
does
pushes
that.
him. Frank pushes
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Raglan against the wall.
Yeah, and that's when they start talking, and then Frank backs off. And then, I can't remember which happened first, but I've got there's this line where I don't trust you, and then like Frank says to Raglan, I don't trust you, and Raglan just kind of like gives this shrug that just really made me laugh. And then the second Frank turns his back, Raglan pulls out his gun.
Yeah.
And he's like, I have a gun. And it's just like, but then it's just like, yeah, he's going to do what Frank needs him to do. And they start talking.
It's a weird flip-flop of character for Dr. Raglan because
yeah.
he has been working on whatever this is that he's been working on. This is his life. And I don't know if the idea is that he realizes it's falling apart and everybody's going to know soon. But he turns like right on the spot to basically just want to help Frank. And
Well, I think it's because he realizes his daughter's there, and I don't think Raglan knew the girl was now there.
oh, okay, yeah,
And I
see
think
what you're
that's
saying.
what does it. So he suddenly really like they've got my daughter, and he's like, and he realizes, oh, Candy's in there. I don't think he knew that,
Yeah,
and that's what suddenly he's like, well, I can't hurt a kid. Like, this has gone too far. I have to stop this. 3 people are dead. So
Yeah.
he probably doesn't even know about the teacher yet.
yeah, okay, yeah. I see that. I think that's a valid way. I just didn't read into it to that point. And I just couldn't figure out why at this point he just stopped and he's like, sure, Frank, I'll do whatever you want and I'll die for you. Essentially, spoilers.
Yeah.
It feels like it could have happened over because the movie is such a slow burn that could have been a bit more, maybe another scene or two where they discuss, because they start and Frank is at Raglan's throat the whole time. It's like, give me back my wife, give him this, and Raglan's just like with Frank's dad, with Grandpa, like he just is nonchalant about the whole thing, and then he just has this turning point that is so quick. It's almost like, well, we got to wrap it up. It's like my favorite movie is kill the monster, credits roll. And like maybe that was what was happening by this time in the movie. Like, we got to do something. So what's your take on Raglan's explanation of all of this?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it really registered with me too much, to be honest.
No, that's why I asked, because I can't really get this sort of. There's nothing in here that gives me this. This is why he did it, and this is how he did it. There's no resolution to any of that, I think.
No, and that's probably by design. Is it feels like it wasn't fully thought through. It was this plot device that he spent some time on, and but it's going to get us. We've got to get moving. We got to get inside. We got to see how these creatures are made.
Yeah, and but that's why slow burn movies work, is when you get these little tastes. And I'm going to reference Phantasm again, because there are a few perfect films, and Phantasm is one of them. The other would be Ghostbusters, and the other is Terminator 2. And they're all perfect in their own ways, but Phantasm will be the slowest of all of them.
Back to the Future, I consider a perfect movie.
That's a good one too. Yeah. It's just it covers everything you need, and it's satisfying. But with Phantasm, there is some slow moments, but you get these little tastes along the way to try and figure out what are these weird midget creatures that are being bred at this morgue again, at the cemetery, and what has the tall man got to do with it, and all this stuff. And then when it's finally revealed, that's when you get these little tastes and wonders, and you're like, okay, it keeps you going because you think there's going to be a payoff. And if you think there's going to be a payoff down the line, it gives you the stamina to get through these slower. At least that's how I can get through movies that I think are slow.
Oh, totally. And I think this kind of shows you that the explanation here is not the payoff. The payoff is when he goes in and sees his wife.
Yes, which you can be at the helm of probably the most Cronenberg scene of Cronenberg movies up to this point. Like, this probably is when he went ham and went up a notch on his Cronenberg.
This is when we saw the real Cronenberg for the first time, probably. So he goes inside, he's talking to his wife, and because the whole idea is he's got to keep her distracted, because that's when because during the conversation with Raglan is when you find out that she's controlling these brood creatures. They're all related to her emotions. They killed her parents because she was angry with him. They killed the teacher because, she called and she thinks the teacher's got something going on with her husband. So he has to go in and talk to her and keep her calm so that Raglan can sneak into the attic, because, of course, these creatures stay in the attic.
They're just in like bunk beds at like summer camp up in that attic, by the way.
Well, all in like matching... different color, but all in matching like tracksuits. It's very cult-like. It's very Branch Davidian.
And I think this is the moment that hinges all on the psychoplasmics, or the like the Gestalt therapy, which is almost like Raglan is saying that she's gone so deep in this therapy that like we need to, that's all she can converse in. So we need to still play out the roles, like in the real version of therapy, where you play characters and extract information.
Man, you got deep on this.
It's a Cronenberg movie. It can be deep.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, Raglan sneaks in. He's got his gun ready, but he's sneaking in. He's trying to find the girl. And meanwhile, a bunch of these creatures are asleep, but other ones are just kind of sitting there on the bed because mom's got some neutral emotions going on, so they aren't reacting. And so Dad's there, Frank's there trying to talk to her, saying, explain it to me. Let me go down this road with you. And Mom this is where you realize just how insane, like legitimately crazy Mom is.
What gets crazier, not to cut you off, but at this moment, this is a turning point for Frank's character too, because he thinks this is all bull dust. Like, he doesn't like any of this whole thing. And now here he is in the end of the movie, having to actually do it. And I won't say believing in it, but he has to believe in it because he knows that this is the only way he can talk to her. So he ends up adapting this process of psychoplasm, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And all is fine and good until she's, reveals herself. And she pulls up her cloth, and there's a brood coming off her side of her stomach, I guess.
Yeah, it's like front side.
Yeah, and then she reaches down and bites it.
It looks like a big, swollen, inflamed placenta.
Yeah, except it's outside of her. and it's just like it's almost like it's own separate skin, and it just kind of bulges out from her. But she reaches down and bites it, and I read that as she's ripping it open, almost like an alien egg sac or something.
Yeah.
Now, what I had read online is that apparently what she suggested and what she wanted to do, and I guess they shot it, but the censors wouldn't let them get away with it, is she licks it clean, like a cat or a dog does with their kittens and their puppies, because she thought that would. So and Cronenberg would like, this would be awesome, and instead now it looks like she's torn a bite out of it and something, which is way more horrific, that she's eating her own child.
Well, because she does take a bite out of the sack to open the sack, and then this embryo comes out, this little fetus comes out, and she does lick it like 2 or 3 times, like a cat or a dog, cleaning it. But you only get that one shot. And what I learned was that this was completely ad lib. So they were filming, and she just pulled out and she started doing it. And it's actually,
it's what animals do. It's a natural thing.
Yeah, to compliment her on that, it's still one of the creepier shots in the movie, because it has this animalistic sort of level to it.
No, and if they had let Cronenberg do it the way he wanted, I think it would have been way more effective. Instead, it almost looks like she's chowing down on it because of the blood that's on her around her mouth and stuff. But I just wrote down, as this whole scene happened, was bleh.
Well, I know we're, like I said, I know we're a little off the straight stretch of sci-fi here, but this is still, again, this is high concept sci-fi, and it's Canadian, and so, but it is, it's an interesting movie. I think at this point, that's the whole big reveal. Like, going to see this movie in '79 in the theater, I'm sure that point where she's sitting there and she's talking to her husband, and then she just pulls up her gown, and then she has this mutant cyst sack on her chest is a great reveal. But it doesn't.
But Frank loses it here. I mean, he can't even fake it to save his daughter at this point.
Yeah,
and he's just horrified, and and then of course the brood all converge on the doctor,
which is still a less gory death for him than the teacher. I feel like he should have had a more spectacular death than anybody else.
Well, they didn't have weapons this time, right? So they're basically all just clawing at him and biting him with their beak gums.
Death by beak gum midgets.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the thing is that this is essentially the end of the film, and what I want out of it more is more about how these things came to exist, and how Dr. Raglan had them form, and is this just all through his conversations and messing with people's minds and having them be able to grow and gestate this stuff, because he puts them in these otherworldly states where they can become, or is there actually some surgery stuff, because it's alluded with the guy's neck, with the big sack on his neck. I just don't know, because it sort of talks about like the doctor as being this crazy doctor, but you don't really see him doing any crazy doctor stuff other than talking, and I feel like that's a shortcoming for the movie. You don't really get a payoff on how he achieved this.
I think the idea is it's supposed to be this is his therapy, and it causes the body to create it themselves, almost like it's expelling all these terrible things out of you. All your psychosis and stuff are kind of being wedged out of your body, and it comes out physically, I think, is what he's trying to say. That's why Jan's got all that crap on his neck, and why the Michael guy has got the stuff all over his chest, and why, because they show the mother at some point, and she's got other markings on her, right? At one point, is it her back, I think they show. And then of course the daughter has had those marks too. And you're supposed to realize now, of course, that she's got the same condition her mom does, that it's already starting to come out. And that's where those marks on the back came from. Nobody realized at the time she wasn't actually assaulted or hurt. It was just a byproduct of her meeting with her mom. The brood kill Raglan. Frank kills, Nola is her name, I think. His wife.
Yeah.
And then the brood all collapse when she's dead, because she controlled them.
She's the host or whatever, and then all of them will go. But Yeah.
Yeah, so then Frank goes, he finds his daughter because she's barricaded herself in a closet, basically, or another room in the attic. And he takes her out, and of course, she's just completely messed up. Won't speak, barely just looks straight ahead and stuff. And as they're driving away, you realize that she's got these marks on her arms. And
Yeah, that's kind of like the gotcha before the credits roll, is that
Yeah.
like Cindy, the daughter, didn't get out. It's going to continue.
Cue Brood 2 Electric Boogaloo.
I like those kind of endings, but because this movie doesn't have a real sense of threat, is kind of the problem with it. Because I don't really know what these brood want, and they have this finite nutrient sac where they can just hang out. Like, you could say if you took mom away, the rest of them would die in their summer camp attic in their bunk beds 3 days later or whatever. And like, what are they going to do? So essentially, if the daughter now has this brood infection, it's also going to be easy to stop. It's not the end of the world because she got out.
Yeah, totally.
It
Totally. It's not like the end of a zombie movie or something. Right?
No, it has some shortcomings to it, but I mean, the 70s, nothing like this came out except Phantasm, which is a perfect movie, which wraps up great. Yeah, I feel like it's, to your point, some things here that had to be dropped or removed or whatever, or just get it done or get it out the door. But it seemed to track pretty well. It has a much higher score review-wise than I would have expected. It's like a 6 point something, and I wonder
6.8 on IMDb.
Yeah, and so I wonder if a lot of that comes from Cronenberg fandom and people discovering it and rewatching it, because
I think so.
I mean, as far as like an actual start to finish 3-act story of entertainment, The Last Chase to me is a much better movie, and it got 4 or something. So I don't know. And then Starship Invasions had great components, but $400,000 less apparently gets you that movie instead of this. But it's a good-looking movie. It sounds great. The composer, did you notice who the composer was for this?
No.
Oh yeah, so the composer is Howard Schur. He did lots of Cronenberg stuff. Probably most people know him from like Lord of the Rings and stuff. But I really liked him from a great movie from 1998, Moving. Richard Pryor, Randy Quaid. My favorite Randy Quaid role. And yeah, he's a very, very good composer. But there's not really a theme here. There's not this driving thing. Again, it just sounds like a good film score, but it doesn't have any kind of, here's the brood theme or this is the underlying tone.
Right.
It's not one that I would buy on a record to listen to because it just sort of flies by,
Yeah, it's like his second movie.
Okay, yeah.
So
I didn't realize.
Yeah, so he's got one credit in 78 for I Miss You, Hugs and Kisses, and then The Brood, and then he does Scanners.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then Videodrome. So he's obviously, and The Fly. So, Dead Ringers, he's, and Cronenberg go way back.
This was on the tail end of a run of Cronenberg movies, too, of Cronenberg Canadian movies. I don't know how he got the hookup or how it was set up, but he did 73 was Across the Land, 75 Shivers, which we talked about, 77 Rabbit. I haven't seen that, which I want to check out because it's essentially a Cronenberg zombie movie. Then, like I said, 79 Fast Company and Brood within the same month. And then Scanners was the last Canadian movie before he moved on. And of course, Michael Ironside being Canadian. So he had a really solid run in Canada. I don't know how that came about or if, 73, this movie Across the Land, he got it funded up there and then he just rolled with it because they're on the tail of each other. I'm not really sure, but it's an interesting run. And then after 81, no films are Canadian anymore in his.
Yeah, Scanners put him on the map, right? So
yeah.
Still, my favorite of his is The Dead Zone. I absolutely love that movie.
It's a great movie.
Just great. Yeah.
That's probably it doesn't have the Cronenberg strange.
No, it's not. It's
strange beak like gums.
Yeah.
But it's actually it's a very solid movie. The complete opposite Christopher Walken movie would be Communion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. I saw Communion.
What is that, like 94 or something like that? When was Communion? Oh wow, November 10th, 1989. My bad. It was
Oh, there
later
you
than I
go.
thought.
Yeah.
So Fire in the Sky came out in 93. I was thinking more of that. Fire in the Sky is also a perfect film. Not Cronenberg.
I
think.
liked Fire in the Sky. I
Love
saw it in
Fire
theaters.
the Sky. We had
TV Sweeney, man.
the model of the UFO at work on the wall by the elevators every day, and so I would go by there, and
Oh,
it was
sweet.
like the one thing nobody paid attention to. They're like, "Oh, it's a spaceship from Star Trek or something." Like, no, dude, it's the Fire in the Sky UFO. Probably the scariest alien abduction scene in all film. I think that hits so hard. It's such a good.
Yeah, it's
thing.
done well. They put the weird plastic stuff over his mouth.
Yeah, that latex
Yeah, it
skin
looks
and
like
the
a
stuff
skin.
in his eye.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's all
Yeah.
great, and the aliens look gross and scary. It's
Well, and that's when you find it like the sort of gray alien thing that you're used to looking at. It's like a spacesuit too.
yeah,
It's just like I thought that was all the.
It's-
Yeah, I know it's based off a guy's recollections and is what he says is his story. So, but so much of it was quite clever.
I should say that a really interesting thing I found out about this movie is that it tracked really well in North America, and it tanked in Europe. And what happened was it was released and it was renamed, strangely enough, in Europe. And the title of the movie was called Chromosome 3. Now, I thought, oh,
Weird.
is this like they're tying it into some other franchise? You know, sometimes they get a movie and then they just say, oh, this is part of this series, but it's technically not.
Yeah.
There's no other movies called Chromosome. So this would have been the first one. So people didn't go see it in Europe because they're like,
'Cause they
Chromosome
thought it
3.
was like
Yeah, they're like,
yeah.
I've never seen 1 or 2. Why would I see 3? And it
Yeah.
really destroyed it. So I'd love to know the conversation or reasoning behind why that was the case or the conversation. Obviously, it's something to do about psychoplasmics and breeding creatures and, you know, doing genetic modification, but the movie doesn't go into it deep enough to warrant a name like that. And
Yeah, the distributor probably just thought it sounded cool and wanted to roll with it.
definitely sounds cool. I'm into it. You know,
Yeah.
but I think that's pretty much covers this movie more in depth than I expected we would go on it. But
Yeah, ditto actually, because like I said, when I first watched it, I was just like, oh yeah, I should be taking notes. So
yeah, it has some components, but it ticks all the boxes for Canadian movie. You know, I feel like it's more mainstream than the previous movies we talk about, and a lot of the movies we're going to continue to talk about.
oh yeah, very
But
much so.
it lands right in that corner where I think it needs to be discussed again, because I'm a fan of high concept mutant midget movies, which again Phantasm is the king of, but The Brood still exists, and it's got some creepiness, and it's worth checking out because it sort of is a pathway into what Cronenberg became, and this is the real movie that sets that up. So you would have to see this to really appreciate all of the catalog moving forward. And it's Canadian, and it's got some Canadian actors in it, and it was funded in Canada.
Very much so. Yeah, there you go. Continuing our Canadian streak.
That's it. Well, join us next week or month or whenever we're releasing these things to watch more of whatever Jason's got in the tank, which will be TBD, I guess.
Yeah, I've got one in mind. I got to make sure we can actually screen it somewhere first. But when I stumbled across online, but I don't really know much about yet.
If it's the one you that I looked at today, the poster, I am excited.
Yeah, that's what it is. But you know, the poster will have nothing to do with the movie.
My favorite kind of movie.
Exactly.
The only thing better than being a kid and going to the video store and picking up a movie with a cool cover is when you turn it over the back and there's a drawing. Like, it doesn't even have a picture of the movie. You're like, this is going to be some stuff. Like, that is another level of 1980s B movie, is when you don't even get a frame from the movie.
Well, I have another movie in mind too that's exactly the same situation.
Bring it. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll probably just do both of them. So
I'm here for it. Great.
Yeah, excellent.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
Good chatting, and we'll see you on the next one. Oh, and
Sounds good.
don't forget, we watched this movie, 1979, The Brood, because anything but casino.
Should probably add, if anyone wants to watch this, it's on Prime Video as well.
Yeah,
which
there's
is-
also a Blu-ray copy on YouTube. I rented it off Prime to get it, but I did find a Blu-ray copy on YouTube currently, which might not last, but it's good to step through for notes and stuff. So,
Oh, nice.
all
There we
right.
go.
Thanks a lot, man. It's always fun.
Ditto.
We'll see you.
Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it. Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television.